Welcome back to Nighttime History, dear listeners. Tonight we journey into the hushed scriptoriums of medieval monasteries and workshops, where patient hands transformed blank parchment into luminous works of art. We are exploring the ancient craft of illuminated manuscripts, a world of crushed gemstones, liquid gold, and devotional patience that created some of humanity's most beautiful books. Thank you for joining us on this gentle voyage through time. Settle in, close your eyes, and let your breathing slow as we step into chambers filled with the soft scratch of quills and the whisper of turning pages. The morning bell echoes through stone corridors as you enter the scriptorium of a Benedictine monastery in 12th century France. Sunlight streams through tall windows, casting golden rectangles across wooden desks arranged in careful rows. The air smells of parchment and ink, with undertones of the beeswax candles that will provide light when clouds gather. This is where books are born, one careful letter at a time. Your footsteps are muffled by rushes scattered across the stone floor. Around you, monks in brown robes bend over their work, each absorbed in his sacred task. The only sounds are the gentle scratch of quills against parchment, the soft tap of a brush being cleaned, and the occasional rustle of a page being turned. This is a place of profound concentration, where creating books is both craft and prayer. The parchment beneath the scribe's hands tells its own story. Made from the carefully prepared skins of sheep, goats, or calves, each sheet represents weeks of labour. You can almost feel the smoothness under your fingertips as you imagine running your hand across its surface. The finest parchment, called vellum, comes from calfskin and feels like silk. Most people think medieval books were made from paper, but actually paper would not become common in Europe until much later. Parchment ruled these quiet chambers. Watch as a scribe prepares his writing surface. He uses a pumice stone to smooth any rough spots, then marks out invisible guidelines with a bone stylus. These faint impressions will guide his letters, ensuring each line sits perfectly straight. The preparation is methodical, almost meditative. There is no rushing in this sacred work. The inks shimmer in small ceramic pots arranged along the desk's edge. Black ink, made from oak galls and iron, provides the foundation for most text. But look closer at those other vessels. Here is vermilion red, ground from cinnabar mineral. There, a brilliant blue made from lapis lazuli, a stone more precious than gold, that travelled thousands of miles from Afghanistan to reach this quiet scriptorium. The deep purple comes from folium, extracted from certain plants, while yellow springs from saffron or orpiment, an arsenic-based mineral that glows like captured sunlight. Creating these colours required knowledge passed down through generations. The pigment makers were artists and chemists combined. They knew that grinding lapis lazuli too finely would dull its brilliant bloom, that mixing certain minerals would create unexpected new hues, that some colours needed to be applied in multiple thin layers, while others demanded bold single strokes. The brushes themselves are marvels of precision, made from the finest animal hairs, squirrel and sable primarily. They come to perfect points that can paint details smaller than your fingernail. Some brushes contain only 3 or 4 hairs, allowing for work so fine it seems impossible. The monk testing his brush against a scrap of parchment moves with the careful deliberation of someone who understands that one wrong stroke could ruin weeks of labour. Now comes the gold, and this is where illuminated manuscripts earn their name. The word illuminate means to light up, and nothing lights up a page like gold leaf applied with masterful skill. Watch as the illuminator prepares the gold. First comes the base layer, often made from gesso, a mixture of chalk, glue, and sometimes ground bone that creates a slightly raised surface. This foundation must dry completely before the gold can be applied. The gold itself arrives as impossibly thin sheets, so delicate that a breath can scatter them like autumn leaves. The illuminator uses a brush made from gilder's tip, often fashioned from squirrel hair, to lift and position each precious fragment. Static electricity helps hold the gold to the brush, but the process requires steady hands and perfect timing. Too much moisture in the air and the gold will not adhere properly. Too little and it crumbles to dust. As the gold settles onto the prepared surface, it is burnished with smooth stones or animal teeth, traditionally from a dog or wolf. The burnishing creates that mirror-like finish that seems to glow with inner light. Under candlelight, these golden letters and decorations would dance and flicker, making the very words appear alive. Let us stop here for a moment, dear listeners. If you are finding peace in these quiet medieval chambers, please consider joining our community of nighttime travellers by subscribing to Nighttime History and turning on notifications so you never miss our gentle journeys through time. A like on this video helps support our channel and allows us to continue crafting these restful historical experiences for you. We would love to know in the comments where you are settling in to sleep tonight and what time it is in your corner of the world. The creation of a single illuminated manuscript could take months or even years. Unlike the hurried world we know today, medieval book production moved at the pace of patience itself. A single page might receive dozens of layers of colour, each one allowed to dry completely before the next application. The illuminator worked with the rhythm of the seasons, taking advantage of the long days of summer and the steady light of winter afternoons. Temperature and humidity affected every aspect of the work. Parchment would expand and contract with changes in weather, potentially cracking dried paint or ink. Smart illuminators learned to read the air itself, knowing when conditions were perfect for laying down a wash of blue sky, or when it was better to focus on detailed penwork that was less sensitive to atmospheric changes. The tools of the trade were simple but precisely crafted. Quill pens came from the flight feathers of geese, swans, or crows, with each type offering different qualities. Goose quills provided reliable, steady lines perfect for text. Swan feathers, larger and more flexible, worked well for decorative elements. Crow quills, small and precise, excelled at the finest detail work. The scribe would carefully select and prepare each quill, cutting the tip at just the right angle, making a small slit to control ink flow, and testing the result on practice parchment. Rulers and compasses helped create the geometric frameworks that underlie many illuminated pages. What appears as free-flowing decoration often follows mathematical principles known to medieval artisans. Circle patterns, golden ratios, and symmetrical designs provided structure beneath the organic curves of vine scrolls and flower petals. The monks and secular illuminators were mathematicians as well as artists. The actual painting process moved from general to specific, from large areas of colour to the finest details. Base colours went down first, establishing the overall composition. Then came modelling, the subtle gradations of light and shadow that gave figures dimension and weight. Highlights followed, often applied with white paint made from ground chalk or lead. Finally came the details that brought everything to life. The individual hairs in a beard, the delicate patterns on a piece of fabric, the tiny flowers scattered through marginal decorations. mistakes were nearly impossible to correct completely. Unlike modern artists who can paint over errors, the illuminator working on parchment had to live with almost every mark. Scraping away unwanted ink with a sharp knife might work for minor corrections, but it left thin spots in the parchment that would accept future applications differently. The pressure to work without error created an atmosphere of intense concentration that you can almost feel settling around you like a comfortable blanket. The workshop's rhythm changed with the church calendar. During Advent and Lent, when fasting and prayer dominated monastic life, illumination work might slow or stop entirely. But in the weeks following Easter, when celebration filled the air, hands moved with renewed energy across waiting pages. Saints' feast days called for specific types of decorations, and the illuminator's calendar was as carefully planned as any farmer's planting schedule. The monastery's pigment workshop occupies a small chamber adjacent to the main scriptorium, and here the true alchemy of colour unfolds. Stone grinding wheels turn slowly, operated by novice monks whose strong arms provide the steady power needed to transform raw minerals into the jewel-toned powders that will soon grace manuscript pages. The sound is hypnotic, a rhythmic whisper of stone against stone that has remained unchanged for centuries. Your eyes adjust to the dimmer light as you step inside. Wooden shelves line the walls, holding carefully labelled pots and packages containing raw materials that have travelled impossible distances to reach this quiet room. That lumpy piece of bright blue rock came from the mountains of Afghanistan, carried by traders along the Silk Road. The small bag of red crystals beside it originated in Spanish mines, while those yellow chunks were dug from German hillsides. Each colour tells a story of commerce, exploration, and the medieval world's hunger for beauty. Most people imagine medieval illuminators simply mixed a few basic colours, but actually their palette rivaled that of any modern artist. The workshop contains over 40 different pigments, each with its own personality and requirements. Some blend easily with binding agents, while others fight every attempt at cooperation. Some fade in bright light, while others grow more vibrant with age. The master illuminator knows them all like old friends, understanding their moods and preferences. Watch as the apprentice begins grinding lapis lazuli, that precious blue stone that costs more than gold. He works carefully, knowing that every speck of powder represents significant expense. The grinding must be just right, not too fine, or the brilliant blue will turn grey and lifeless. Not too coarse, or it will not bind properly with the egg white and gum arabic that will carry it to the page. His movements are patient and steady. There is no hurrying this ancient process. The mortar and pestle used for this delicate work are made from porphyry, an extremely hard volcanic rock that will not contaminate the pigment with its own particles. Lesser workshops might use marble or even wood, but here in the monastery, only the finest materials touch these precious colours. The smooth stone has been worn into perfect curves by generations of hands, its surface polished to mirror brightness by countless grinding sessions. Beside the lapis lazuli station, another apprentice works with vermilion, creating the brilliant red that will adorn the robes of saints and the initial letters of important passages. This pigment comes from cinnabar, a mercury sulfide mineral that must be handled with knowledge and respect. The grinding releases tiny amounts of mercury vapour, so the work happens near an open window where fresh air can carry away any dangerous fumes. Medieval craftsmen understood the risks of their materials in ways that might surprise modern observers. The yellow pigments present their own challenges. Orpiment, An arsenic sulfide that glows like captured sunlight requires extreme care in handling. The grinder wears leather gloves and works slowly to avoid creating dust clouds. Yet despite its dangers, orpiment was prized for its intensity and permanence. Cheaper alternatives existed, like yellow ochre from clay deposits, but they could not match orpiment's luminous quality. For the most important manuscripts, expense and risk became secondary to beauty. Green pigments often came not from single minerals, but from careful mixtures. Verdigris, formed by exposing copper plates to wine or vinegar vapours, provided one option. The metal would slowly develop a blue-green patina that could be scraped off and ground into powder. But verdigris was temperamental, sometimes changing colour unexpectedly or eating through parchment with its acidic nature. More stable greens came from mixing yellow and blue pigments, though this required perfect understanding of how different materials would behave when combined. The binding agents that transform dry pigment into workable paint deserve their own reverence. Egg white, carefully separated and beaten to a light foam, serves as the primary binder for many colours. It dries quickly, adheres well to parchment, and creates a slight sheen that enhances the pigment's natural beauty. But not all eggs are equal for this purpose. The workshop prefers eggs from free-range hens fed on certain grains, believing this diet produces stronger, clearer whites. Gum arabic, harvested from acacia trees in distant lands, provides another binding option. This tree resin dissolves in water to create a clear, viscous liquid that holds pigment particles in perfect suspension. Unlike egg white, gum arabic dries to a completely matte finish, making it ideal for colours that should not shine. The resin arrives in irregular lumps that must be sorted and tested, as quality varies dramatically between different harvests and regions. Some pigments demand their own special treatment. Gold, obviously precious, required careful preparation beyond simple grinding. True gold leaf was hammered to incredible thinness, so delicate that the slightest breath could scatter it. But powdered gold, used for painted details rather than applied leaf, mixed with specific proportions of honey and gum arabic to create a paint that would flow smoothly from brush to parchment while maintaining its metallic brilliance. Silver presented different challenges. Unlike gold, silver tarnishes when exposed to air and certain compounds. Medieval illuminators developed various techniques to delay this process, mixing silver powder with egg white and a tiny amount of salt, or grinding it with garlic juice, which contains sulfur compounds that actually help preserve the metal's brightness. These recipes were closely guarded secrets, passed from master to apprentice through careful demonstration rather than written instruction. The purple pigments held particular significance in medieval culture, as purple was the colour of royalty and high church office. True purple came from murex shells, harvested from Mediterranean waters and processed through a complex method that yielded only tiny amounts of dye. A pound of purple pigment might represent the processing of thousands of shells, making it literally worth more than its weight in silver. Folium, a plant-based alternative, provided a more affordable purple option, though it lacked the depth and permanence of the shell-derived version. Creating certain colours required patience that stretched across seasons. Some plant-based pigments needed to be harvested at specific times of year when the concentration of colouring compounds reached its peak. Others required aging, like the wine used in certain red preparations, which had to sit in wooden casks for months or even years before it could be used in pigment creation. The workshop operated on cycles that connected it to the natural world in ways modern manufacturers cannot imagine. Temperature affected everything in the pigment workshop. Cold weather made some binding agents thick and difficult to work with, while heat could cause others to spoil or separate. The master kept detailed notes about which colours worked best in different seasons, adjusting recipes and techniques to match the changing conditions. Winter grinding might produce finer powders due to the cold's effect on the minerals, while summer's warmth allowed for certain chemical reactions that were impossible in cooler months. The water used in pigment preparation came from carefully chosen sources. Rainwater, collected in wooden barrels and allowed to settle until perfectly clear, was preferred for its purity. Well water, with its dissolved minerals, could react unpredictably with certain pigments, creating muddy colours or unwanted chemical changes. Some colours required distilled water, created by boiling and condensing steam through primitive but effective apparatus constructed within the monastery itself. Quality control in the medieval pigment workshop relied on experience and observation rather than scientific instruments. The master illuminator could judge a pigment's quality by its colour under different types of light, its texture when ground, the way it mixed with various binders, and how it behaved when applied to test pieces of parchment. These skills took decades to develop and represented knowledge that could not be easily replaced if lost. Storage of prepared pigments required its own expertise. Some colours needed to be kept completely dry, sealed in wax-lined containers with tight-fitting lids. Others remained stable only when mixed with specific amounts of binding agent, stored in small pots covered with dampened cloth to prevent the surface from forming a skin. A few pigments actually improved with age, developing richer, more complex hues as chemical changes slowly occurred within the mixture. The workshop's inventory represented not just materials, but connections to the wider medieval world. That packet of saffron threads came from Spanish fields where workers bent over purple flowers in the pre-dawn light. The bag of ground pearls, used to create the most lustrous whites, originated in oyster beds off distant coasts. Even common ochres and umbers told stories of clay deposits and mining communities, of cart drivers and river barges that carried Earth's colours to this quiet chamber where they would be transformed into sacred art. The prepared pigments now wait in their small vessels, but transforming them into luminous manuscript pages requires an entirely different set of skills. You move back into the main scriptorium where the scribes and illuminators work in careful coordination, their activities as choreographed as any formal dance. The process unfolds in layers, each step building upon the last with mathematical precision. At his desk near the largest window, Brother Thomas prepares his quill with the practiced motions of someone who has performed this ritual thousands of times. The goose feather in his hand came from a bird that lived free in the monastery's own fields, fed on grain and allowed to develop strong, flexible flight feathers. Most people think any feather can become a quill, but actually the best writing instruments come only from the outer wing feathers of adult geese, taken during specific molting periods when the quill walls are thickest and most resilient. Watch his hands as he shapes the writing tip. The knife blade moves in controlled cuts, first removing the barbs from the lower portion of the shaft, then carefully shaping the writing end. The angle of the cut determines how the quill will behave on parchment. Too steep and the ink flow becomes erratic. Too shallow and the letters lack the crisp edges that mark professional work. A small slit up the centre of the tip controls ink distribution, but this cut must be precisely placed or the quill will split further under writing pressure. The ink reservoir within the hollow quill shaft holds only enough for a few letters, requiring frequent dipping. But experienced scribes use this limitation to their advantage, developing a writing rhythm that matches the ink's capacity. Each dip becomes a brief pause for thought, ensuring that words flow logically and letters maintain consistent spacing. The apparent constraint actually creates better writing through enforced deliberation. Temperature affects quill performance in ways that modern ballpoint users never consider. Cold weather makes the hollow shaft contract slightly, holding less ink, while heat can cause the keratin to soften and lose its precise shape. Winter scribes often keep spare quills tucked inside their robes, warming them with body heat before use. Summer workers position themselves to avoid direct sunlight that might soften their carefully shaped tips. The formation of individual letters follows strict rules developed over centuries of manuscript tradition. Each letter has its proper proportions, measured in precise units called modules. The height of a minuscule letter equals exactly 4 modules, while ascenders and descenders extend additional modules above and below the baseline. These mathematical relationships ensure visual harmony across entire pages of text, creating the pleasing proportions that make medieval manuscripts so satisfying to view. Brother Thomas begins writing, his hand moving in fluid strokes that seem effortless but represent years of training. The angle of his wrist, the pressure of his grip, the speed of his movement, all have been refined through countless hours of practice. His letters flow in the Gothic script known as textualis, where each character is constructed from precise combinations of straight strokes and controlled curves. The pen angle remains constant at 45 degrees to the writing line, creating the characteristic thick and thin strokes that give Gothic letters their distinctive rhythm. Most people imagine medieval scribes hunched over their work, but actually proper writing posture was carefully taught and maintained. The scribe sits upright, shoulders square, with the parchment positioned at a slight angle on a slanted writing desk. This arrangement reduces hand fatigue and allows for better ink flow. The left hand guides and steadies the parchment, while the right hand controls the pen, working together in precise coordination. The ruling of the page provides invisible structure for all this careful letterwork. Before any writing begins, the scribe uses a straight edge and stylus to mark faint guidelines across the parchment surface. These rules are barely visible, but absolutely essential, ensuring that lines of text remain parallel and margins stay consistent. The ruling pattern varies depending on the type of text and the intended use of the finished manuscript. Books meant for public reading require wider margins and larger letters, while personal prayer books can accommodate smaller, more compact layouts. As Brother Thomas completes each line, Sister Margaret begins her complementary work as illuminator. Her task is to transform his black text into a symphony of colour and gold. But her additions must enhance rather than overwhelm the written words. She begins with the initials, those enlarged first letters that mark the beginning of new sections or chapters. These decorative letters will eventually tower over the surrounding text, but they start as careful pencil sketches traced lightly on the parchment. The construction of an illuminated initial follows architectural principles. The basic letter form provides the structural foundation, like the frame of a building. Decorative elements are added in logical sequence, with major design components established first and fine details saved for last. A large letter might incorporate geometric patterns, plant motifs, human figures, or even complete narrative scenes. But all these elements must work together to maintain the letter's basic legibility and function. Sister Margaret begins her colour application with the lightest hues, working gradually toward the darkest tones. This sequence prevents lighter colours from being contaminated by darker pigments and allows for corrections if early layers do not achieve the desired effect. Her brushes vary in size from broad washes used for background areas down to tiny detail, brushes that contain only 2 or 3 hairs. Each brush requires different handling techniques and serves specific purposes in the overall composition. The layering process reveals the true sophistication of medieval illumination technique. Base colours go down first, establishing the overall colour scheme and major areas of the design. These initial washes often appear flat and uniform, showing little of the richness that will characterise the finished work. Modelling comes next, the subtle gradations that give forms a 3-dimensional appearance. Shadow areas receive deeper tones while highlights remain light, creating the illusion of depth on the flat parchment surface. Medieval illuminators understood optical effects that would not be scientifically explained until centuries later. They knew that warm colours appear to advance while cool colours recede, using this principle to create spatial depth in their compositions. They realised that complementary colours intensify each other when placed side by side, exploiting this effect to make their pigments appear more brilliant than they actually were. These techniques were learned through apprenticeship and observation, passed down through generations of practicing artists. The application of gold leaf represents the ultimate test of an illuminator's skill. Unlike gold paint, which can be applied and modified like any other pigment, gold leaf must be positioned perfectly on the first attempt. There are no second chances with these impossibly thin sheets of pure metal. Sister Margaret prepares for this crucial step by ensuring that all underlying work is completely dry and that the gesso foundation has achieved exactly the right degree of tackiness. The gesso itself requires precise preparation. Made from chalk, glue and sometimes ground bone, it must be mixed to exactly the right consistency and applied in thin, even layers. Too thick and it will crack when dry. Too thin and it will not provide sufficient adhesion for the gold. The mixture must be heated gently to activate the binding agents, then allowed to cool to room temperature before use. Medieval workshops often prepared gesso in large batches, storing it in covered pots where it would remain workable for several days. Applying the gesso requires steady hands and perfect timing. Sister Margaret uses a brush to paint the raised areas where gold will eventually rest, building up layers until the desired thickness is achieved. The surface must be absolutely smooth, as any imperfection will show through the delicate gold leaf. She works in sections, completing one area before moving to the next, allowing each application to dry thoroughly before proceeding. The gold leaf itself arrives as books of tissue-thin sheets, each piece separated by tissue paper and protected from air currents that could scatter these precious fragments. Individual sheets are so delicate that static electricity can cause them to leap unexpectedly from their backing papers. Experienced illuminators learn to work in still air, timing their movements to avoid creating drafts that might disturb the gold. Sister Margaret uses a gilder's tip, a special brush made from squirrel hair, to lift and position each sheet of gold. The brush has been lightly charged with static electricity by drawing it across her hair, creating just enough attraction to hold the gold without damaging it. Her movements are deliberate and controlled, lowering the gold onto the prepared gesso surface with surgical precision. Once contact is made, the gold cannot be repositioned without damage. The burnishing process transforms dull, matte gold into mirror-bright metal that seems to glow with inner light. Using a smooth stone tool, traditionally made from bloodstone or agate, Sister Margaret applies firm, even pressure to the gold surface. The burnishing must be thorough, but not excessive. Too little pressure leaves the gold dull and poorly adhered. Too much can tear the delicate metal or push it through the gesso layer beneath. Different areas of goldwork require different burnishing techniques. Flat surfaces can withstand more aggressive treatment, while raised details need gentler handling. The illuminator learns to read the gold's response, adjusting pressure and stroke direction to achieve optimal results. Properly burnished gold leaf will last for centuries, maintaining its brilliance long after organic pigments have begun to fade. The interaction between gold and coloured pigments creates some of illumination's most spectacular effects. Gold painted over coloured backgrounds takes on warm or cool tones depending on the underlying hue. Red backgrounds make gold appear more yellow, while blue foundations create cooler, whiter gold tones. These colour interactions were carefully planned and exploited by medieval artists to create visual harmonies impossible with pigments alone. Final details complete the illumination process. Tiny highlights painted with white pigment add sparkle to gems and moisture to eyes. Hair-thin lines define architectural elements and separate overlapping forms. Pattern work fills background areas with intricate designs that reward close examination. Each of these finishing touches requires perfect brush control and unwavering concentration, as mistakes at this stage cannot be easily corrected. The completed illuminated initial now dominates its section of the page, drawing the eye while simultaneously directing attention to the text it introduces. Its colours complement the overall page design. Its gold catches and reflects available light, and its decorative elements tell stories that expand upon the written words. This single letter represents weeks of labour by multiple craftspeople. Yet it serves the humble function of helping readers navigate through the manuscript's contents. The completed illumination catches the afternoon light streaming through the scriptorium's tall windows, but this moment represents just one beat in the steady rhythm that governs life in this sacred workspace. The day began hours before dawn, when the first bell called the community to matins, and it will continue until the final prayers of Compline send everyone to their beds. Between these bookends of worship, the scriptorium operates according to patterns as carefully regulated as any monastic office. Brother Thomas sets down his quill and flexes his fingers, a gesture repeated countless times throughout each working day. Most people imagine medieval scribes writing continuously for hours, but actually the work unfolds in carefully measured intervals. 20 minutes of intensive writing followed by a brief rest prevents hand cramping and maintains the precise letter formation essential to professional manuscript production. These breaks also protect the eyes from strain, as focusing on detailed pen work in medieval lighting conditions could quickly lead to headaches and blurred vision. The scriptorium schedule flows with the natural progression of daylight rather than following any mechanical clock. Winter days begin later and end earlier, with scribes making maximum use of the precious hours when sunlight provides adequate illumination. Summer extends the working time but brings its own challenges, as intense heat can make parchment limp and cause ink to flow unpredictably. The experienced supervisor adjusts daily assignments to match these seasonal variations, ensuring that the most demanding work always receives the best possible conditions. Morning light, filtering through windows that face deliberately eastward, provides the clearest illumination for detailed penwork. The scribes position themselves to take advantage of this natural spotlight, with senior monks claiming the choicest spots near the largest windows. Newer members of the scriptorium work further from the light source, but this arrangement serves a practical purpose beyond mere hierarchy. Beginning scribes produce work that requires less precision, while master illuminators need every photon of available light for their intricate colour applications. The quality of light changes throughout the day in ways that affect different types of manuscript work. Morning's crisp clarity suits the precise letter forms of formal text hands. Midday's intense brightness works well for bold decorative elements and large-scale colour washes. Afternoon's golden tones enhance the application of gold leaf and warm pigments, while evening's softer illumination proves ideal for gentle background details and subtle shading work. Skilled supervisors assign tasks to match these natural lighting cycles. Seasonal variations create dramatic changes in the scriptorium's atmosphere and productivity. During the long nights of winter, when daylight barely extends from terse to none, every moment of natural illumination becomes precious. Scribes work with intense focus during these brief bright hours, then turn to preparatory tasks like mixing pigments, ruling parchment, and preparing quills when darkness forces them to rely on flickering candlelight. Candles provide adequate light for routine maintenance, but lack the steady brightness needed for precision work. Spring brings renewal to the scriptorium along with longer days. Windows that have been shuttered against winter's bitter cold open once again, flooding the workspace with fresh air and brilliant light. This is the season for beginning major projects, when enthusiasm runs high and the promise of summer's extended working hours makes ambitious undertakings seem achievable. Scribes often report feeling renewed energy during these lengthening days, their productivity climbing along with the sun's daily arc. Summer presents both opportunities and challenges for manuscript production. The extended daylight allows for marathon working sessions, but excessive heat can make concentrated work nearly impossible. Parchment becomes soft and prone to ink bleeding, while the scribes themselves struggle with fatigue and dehydration. Wise supervisors schedule the most demanding illumination work for early morning hours, saving routine copying for the cooler evenings when oil lamps can supplement the fading daylight. The transition into autumn brings a sense of urgency to the scriptorium. Winter's shortened days approach like a deadline, pushing everyone to complete as much work as possible while good light remains available. This season often sees the finishing of projects begun in spring's optimism, with final details and corrections receiving attention before the dark months ahead. Limit activities to basic maintenance and preparation for the next cycle. The physical arrangement of the scriptorium reflects centuries of accumulated wisdom about communal workspace design. Desks are positioned to minimize shadows cast by workers upon their neighbors, while still allowing for easy movement between stations. The supervisor's desk commands a view of the entire room, enabling constant monitoring of progress and quality without creating an atmosphere of oppressive surveillance. Storage areas for materials and finished work occupy spaces where they remain accessible but do not interfere with the primary workflow. Silence dominates the working atmosphere, but this quiet serves practical as well as spiritual purposes. Conversation would disrupt the intense concentration required for precise letterwork, while also interfering with the supervisor's ability to detect problems through subtle changes in the sounds of quills scratching across parchment or brushes moving through pigment. Different types of manuscript work create distinct acoustic signatures, and experienced ears can identify issues before they become serious mistakes. The rhythm of communal meals punctuates each day's work. providing natural breaking points that prevent fatigue from building to dangerous levels. Most people assume medieval monks ate simple, monotonous food, but actually monastery kitchens often provided varied, nutritious meals designed to sustain intellectual labour. Fish rich in oils that support brain function appeared regularly, along with eggs that provide steady energy for detailed work. Even the timing of meals reflects understanding of how nutrition affects mental performance. Breakfast, taken after the early morning service of prime, consists of light foods that provide energy without causing drowsiness. Bread with honey supplies quick fuel for the brain, while weak ale offers hydration and additional calories. The main meal at midday includes heartier fare, but portions remain moderate to prevent the afternoon lethargy that could compromise detailed work. The evening meal provides an opportunity for the community to discuss the day's progress and plan tomorrow's activities. Weather influences the scriptorium's operations in ways that extend far beyond simple lighting conditions. High humidity makes parchment expand and become soft, causing ink to spread unpredictably and preventing gold leaf from adhering properly. Dry conditions create the opposite problem, making parchment brittle and prone to cracking under the pressure of writing instruments. Experienced supervisors learn to read atmospheric signs, adjusting work assignments to match prevailing conditions. Storm days bring their own unique atmosphere to the scriptorium. The dramatic interplay of light and shadow as clouds race across the sky creates constantly changing illumination that makes precise work nearly impossible. These become days for preparatory activities, equipment maintenance, and planning future projects. The sound of rain against windows and wind through corridors provides a natural soundtrack that many scribes find conducive to creative thinking and problem solving. The scriptorium's daily schedule accommodates the broader rhythms of monastic life, while maintaining productivity in manuscript creation. The canonical hours that structure religious observance also provide natural breaks in the working day, preventing the eye strain and hand fatigue that would result from uninterrupted labour. These prayer times serve as communal breathing spaces, allowing workers to step back from immediate concerns and gain fresh perspective on their tasks. Seasonal festivals and holy days create special demands on the scriptorium's output. Christmas, Easter, and major saints' feast days require specially decorated manuscripts for liturgical use, with these projects receiving priority during the weeks leading up to each celebration. The scriptorium's annual calendar reflects this cycle of religious observance, with production schedules planned months in advance to ensure that ceremonial books are completed on time. The training of new scribes unfolds according to its own careful timeline. Novices begin with basic exercises, practicing letter formation on reusable wax tablets before graduating to precious parchment. This apprenticeship period can last for years, with advancement depending on demonstrated skill rather than arbitrary time limits. Most people think medieval learning was harsh and punitive, but actually successful scriptoriums used patient, encouraging teaching methods that recognized individual differences in aptitude and learning speed. Advanced students work alongside master craftsmen, observing techniques that cannot be taught through verbal instruction alone. The subtle pressure needed for different types of pen strokes, the precise timing required for gold leaf application, the visual judgment necessary for colour mixing, all these skills transfer through careful observation and guided practice. Knowledge flows naturally through the working community. With each generation, building upon the accumulated wisdom of their predecessors. Quality control operates through constant peer review rather than formal inspection. Experienced scribes automatically notice inconsistencies in their neighbours' work, offering gentle corrections before mistakes become serious problems. This collaborative approach maintains high standards while fostering a supportive atmosphere that encourages learning and improvement. Serious errors receive attention from senior craftsmen, but the emphasis remains on education rather than punishment. The completion of major manuscripts creates moments of celebration that punctuate the scriptorium's normally quiet routine. These finished works represent months or years of collective effort, with every member of the community contributing their specialized skills to the final result. The binding of a completed codex, the application of final protective treatments, and the formal presentation to church authorities mark significant milestones in the workshop's ongoing cycle of creation. Evening activities in the scriptorium focus on preparation for the following day's work. Quills receive final sharpening, pigments are mixed and stored, and parchment sheets are selected and prepared for tomorrow's assignments. This daily preparation ritual ensures that morning work can begin immediately, without delays for basic setup tasks. The last scribes to leave arrange materials and tools with the care of craftsmen who understand that small details determine the success of major undertakings. The gentle evening preparations in the monastic scriptorium represent only one strand in the vast web of medieval manuscript production. Beyond these sacred walls, in the bustling streets of Paris, London, and Florence, entirely different workshops hum with activity as secular scribes and illuminators serve a growing market for books that extends far beyond religious texts. The sound of hammering and sawing mingles with the familiar scratch of quills as these commercial enterprises operate on scales that would astonish the monastery's carefully regulated community. Master Guillaume's workshop occupies 3 floors of a narrow building in Paris's University district, where the demand for textbooks and scholarly treatises has created a thriving book trade. Unlike the monastery's single scriptorium, this establishment operates as a complex business, with specialized departments for each stage of production. The ground floor houses the parchment preparation area, where apprentices stretch and scrape animal skins with techniques that differ significantly from monastic methods. Speed and efficiency drive these commercial operations, with workers processing dozens of sheets daily rather than the monastery's more leisurely pace. Most people assume medieval books were always expensive luxury items, but actually the rise of universities in the 13th century created demand for affordable textbooks that ordinary students could rent or purchase. Guillaume's workshop specializes in these utilitarian manuscripts, using simplified decoration and standardized layouts to reduce production costs. A university student might rent a copy of Aristotle's works for a semester, returning it for the next student to use, in a system that prefigures modern library operations by several centuries. The organization of labor in secular workshops follows principles that would be familiar to modern factory managers. Scribes specialize in particular types of scripts or subject matters, with one craftsman becoming expert in legal documents while another focuses on medical texts. This specialization increases both speed and accuracy, as workers develop deep familiarity with the vocabulary and formatting requirements of their chosen fields. The monastery's generalist approach, where each scribe might work on any type of manuscript, cannot compete with this focused efficiency. Illuminators in commercial workshops often work from pattern books, collections of standardized designs that can be adapted to different texts and clients. These model books represent accumulated artistic knowledge, containing carefully drawn examples of everything from decorative borders to complex narrative scenes. A skilled illuminator can select appropriate elements from these resources and combine them into fresh compositions, much like a modern graphic designer working with digital assets. This system allows workshops to produce high-quality decoration without the time-consuming original design work that characterizes monastic illumination. The workshop's daily rhythm differs dramatically from the monastery's prayer-structured schedule. Work begins at dawn and continues until darkness makes detailed tasks impossible, with breaks determined by practical necessity rather than canonical hours. Meals are taken in shifts to maintain continuous production, and conversations flow freely as workers coordinate their efforts and share technical knowledge. The atmosphere buzzes with commercial energy rather than contemplative silence. Royal commissions represent the pinnacle of secular manuscript production, demanding resources and skills that challenge even the most accomplished workshops. When King Charles V of France orders a new ceremonial psalter, Guillaume's establishment transforms into something resembling a medieval NASA mission, marshalling unprecedented materials and expertise for a project that will showcase French cultural achievement across European courts. The entire workshop reorganizes around this single book, with normal production suspended to focus every resource on royal satisfaction. These prestigious projects bring exotic materials that never appear in monastic scriptoriums. Purple parchment dyed with genuine murex shells, gold leaf beaten to impossible thinness by specialist goldsmiths, and pigments ground from gems that represent fortunes in themselves. The workshop's storage rooms fill with treasures that would fund monastery operations for years, all destined for a single manuscript that will spend most of its existence locked in royal treasuries. The artistic ambitions of royal manuscripts push illuminators beyond conventional limits. Miniature paintings within these books rival panel paintings in complexity and sophistication, featuring elaborate architectural backgrounds, detailed landscape settings, and portrait-quality human figures. Guillaume employs specialists trained in oil painting techniques, adapting their skills to manuscript work in ways that blur traditional distinctions between book illumination and fine art. Quality control for royal commissions operates at unprecedented levels of scrutiny. Every page receives examination by multiple experts before approval, with rejected sheets representing significant financial losses that smaller workshops could not absorb. The King's representatives visit regularly to monitor progress, bringing feedback that can require major revisions, even in advanced stages of production. This pressure creates stress unknown in monastic environments, where divine approval matters more than earthly criticism. Travelling scribes represent another dimension of medieval manuscript culture, carrying their skills along trade routes and between noble courts in patterns that spread artistic techniques across vast distances. Brother Jerome, recently departed from his monastery with proper permissions, now serves as an itinerant specialist, offering skills that local workshops cannot provide. His leather satchel contains carefully selected tools and materials, everything needed to establish temporary workshops wherever his expertise is needed. These mobile craftsmen often possess knowledge unavailable to settled workshops, having learned techniques from masters across different regions and traditions. Jerome carries Greek manuscript methods learned during a pilgrimage, to Constantinople. Arabic mathematical notation encountered in Spanish monasteries, and innovative binding techniques observed in German workshops. This cross-pollination of ideas accelerates artistic development in ways that isolated communities cannot achieve independently. The economics of travelling scribes create unique challenges and opportunities. Their overhead costs remain minimal compared to established workshops, allowing them to offer competitive prices for specialised services. However, they lack access to extensive material inventories and must often adapt their techniques to locally available supplies. Jerome has learned to create acceptable substitutes for preferred pigments, using regional clay deposits and mineral sources to approximate colours he would normally purchase from established suppliers. Seasonal patterns govern the movements of travelling scribes, with summer providing optimal conditions for long-distance travel, while winter encourages extended stays in comfortable locations. Jerome times his journeys to arrive at major courts during seasons when noble patrons have leisure for commissioning manuscripts, avoiding harvest times when even wealthy households focus on practical concerns. His reputation depends on understanding these social rhythms and positioning himself where demand meets opportunity. The technical challenges of mobile manuscript production require innovative solutions. Travelling scribes carry portable writing desks that fold into compact packages, lightweight pigment sets that provide maximum colour range with minimum bulk, and selection of pre-prepared parchment sheets that can accommodate various project requirements. Jerome's equipment represents centuries of refinement in portable workshop design, each item selected for versatility and reliability under varying conditions. Communication networks among travelling scribes create informal systems for sharing information about opportunities, dangers, and technical developments. These craftsmen maintain correspondence with colleagues across Europe, exchanging news about innovative techniques, reliable suppliers, and potential patrons. Jerome's letters, written on precious parchment scraps, carry artistic knowledge across borders in ways that formal institutions cannot match. Women's participation in manuscript production becomes more visible in secular workshops than in monastery scriptoriums. Dame Marguerite operates her own illumination business in London, specialising in prayer books for wealthy women who prefer female artisans for these intimate spiritual texts. Her workshop employs other women whose skills rival any male practitioner, challenging common assumptions about medieval gender roles in artistic professions. Most people think medieval women had limited professional opportunities, but actually the manuscript trade provided paths for female entrepreneurship that existed in few other industries. Dame Marguerite's success stems from understanding her market-specific needs, creating books that reflect women's spiritual concerns and aesthetic preferences in ways that male-dominated workshops often missed. Her prayer books feature saints particularly relevant to women's experiences, decorated with flowers and colours that appeal to feminine sensibilities. The training of apprentices in secular workshops follows different patterns than monastic education. Commercial establishments focus on marketable skills rather than comprehensive education, producing specialists who excel in particular techniques but may lack the broad cultural knowledge that characterises monastery-trained scribes. This specialisation serves commercial needs effectively, but sometimes results in craftsmen who can execute techniques perfectly without understanding their historical or spiritual significance. International trade in manuscripts creates networks that span the medieval world, with books serving as both commercial products and cultural ambassadors. Guillaume's workshop regularly fulfills orders from English nobles, Italian merchants, and German bishops, each commission requiring adaptation to different aesthetic preferences and functional requirements. These international connections spread artistic styles across borders and create hybrid forms that reflect multiple cultural influences. The rise of paper manufacturing in the later medieval period begins to transform manuscript production in ways that will eventually revolutionize the entire industry. Early paper mills, established by Arab craftsmen in Spain and later spreading throughout Europe, provide writing surfaces that cost significantly less than parchment while offering acceptable quality for many purposes. Forward-thinking workshops begin experimenting with paper for draft work and less prestigious commissions, though parchment remains essential for the finest manuscripts. Technological innovations in secular workshops often advance more rapidly than in conservative monastic environments. New ink formulations that dry faster and resist fading, improved binding techniques that create more durable books, and innovative tools that increase working efficiency all emerge from commercial establishments where competitive pressure drives constant experimentation. These advances eventually filter into monastery scriptoriums, but the initial development occurs in profit-motivated secular workshops. The social status of secular scribes varies dramatically depending on their specializations and clientele. Master craftsmen serving royal courts enjoy prestige comparable to other court artisans, while ordinary copyists working on routine documents occupy much lower social positions. This hierarchy creates career incentives that encourage skill development and specialization in ways that the monastery's egalitarian approach cannot match. Competition between workshops drives innovation in both technical methods and business practices. Establishments develop signature styles that distinguish their products in competitive markets, creating artistic brands that wealthy patrons learn to recognize and request specifically. This competition benefits customers through improved quality and expanded options, while pushing craftsmen to develop new techniques and refine existing skills. The competitive atmosphere of secular workshops produces not only technical innovations, but also sophisticated systems of visual communication that transform manuscripts into complex layers of meaning far beyond their written text. In Dame Marguerite's London atelier, an illuminated psalter destined for a noble lady's private devotions contains messages that would be invisible to casual observers, but speak volumes to those who understand the intricate language of medieval symbolism. Every element within these decorated pages carries significance, from the choice of flowers in border decorations to the colours of garments worn by painted figures. The white lily that blooms in the margin beside a prayer to the Virgin Mary announces purity and divine grace to any educated viewer, while the red rose climbing the opposite border whispers of divine love and martyrdom. Medieval audiences read these visual vocabularies as fluently as they read Latin text, understanding that illuminators embedded layers of meaning within every decorative choice. The positioning of symbolic elements within page layouts follows rules as strict as any grammatical structure. Sacred figures appear in upper portions of compositions, reflecting their elevated spiritual status, while earthly concerns occupy lower registers. Left sides of images traditionally represent the past or the earthly realm, while right sides point toward the future and the divine. These spatial conventions allow illuminators to create complex theological arguments through careful placement of visual elements, constructing scholarly debates without writing a single word. Colours themselves speak in this visual language, with each hue carrying established meanings that transcend individual artistic preferences. Blue, the most expensive pigment, naturally becomes associated with divinity and truth, making it the inevitable choice for the Virgin Mary's robes and Christ's divine nature. Red speaks of sacrifice, martyrdom, and divine love, but also of earthly power when worn by kings and nobles. Gold represents not merely wealth, but the divine light that illuminates spiritual truth, while green suggests hope, renewal, and the natural world that reflects God's creative power. Most people assume medieval symbolism was universally understood, but actually, these visual languages varied significantly between regions, social classes, and historical periods. What read as Orthodox Christian symbolism to a Parisian noble might carry entirely different meanings to a Venetian merchant or a German peasant. Illuminators serving international clienteles learned to navigate these cultural differences, adapting their symbolic vocabularies to match their audience's expectations and understanding. The margins of manuscripts provide spaces for visual commentary that often contradicts or complicates the main text's messages. Here, in borders filled with writhing vines and fantastic creatures, illuminators could express ideas that would be dangerous or inappropriate in central compositions. Political criticism disguised as animal fables, theological debates presented through symbolic confrontations, and social commentary embedded in seemingly decorative elements all flourish in these liminal spaces where conventional rules relax. Marginalia reveals the playful and irreverent sides of medieval manuscript culture that contrast sharply with popular images of grim religious orthodoxy. Snails engage in nightly combat with tiny warriors. Rabbits play musical instruments while dancing in procession, and hybrid creatures combine human heads with animal bodies in fantastic combinations that defy natural order. These images often parody serious themes from the main text, creating visual jokes that would have delighted medieval audiences while providing subtle social commentary. The famous killer rabbits that appear throughout medieval marginalia represent more than mere whimsy. These aggressive lagomorphs, armed with swords and shields as they attack human opponents, invert normal power relationships in ways that comment on social hierarchies and political structures. The weak creature defeating the strong warrior suggests possibilities for social reversal that could not be expressed directly in societies where political criticism carried serious consequences. Hidden messages within illuminated manuscripts sometimes convey information that was literally dangerous to communicate openly. During periods of political upheaval, loyal supporters of deposed rulers might embed identifying symbols within seemingly innocent decorative elements, creating networks of coded communication that escaped official censorship. A particular flower pattern, a specific colour combination, or an unusual animal figure could identify political allegiances or religious beliefs that had to remain concealed from hostile authorities. Heretical ideas occasionally surface in manuscript decorations disguised within orthodox imagery in ways that require deep knowledge to decode. Illuminators sympathetic to suppressed theological movements might incorporate subtle visual references that spoke to fellow believers while remaining invisible to orthodox authorities. These coded messages created underground communication networks that helped sustain forbidden religious movements through periods of persecution. The symbolic language of heraldry intersects with manuscript illumination in complex ways that reflect medieval society's obsession with lineage, honor, and social status. Noble patrons commissioning manuscripts expected their family arms to appear prominently within decorations, but these heraldic elements carried meanings that extended far beyond simple identification. The positioning of different coats of arms within a single composition could suggest political alliances, marriage negotiations, or claims to disputed territories, turning decorative programs into diplomatic statements. Professional heralds worked closely with illuminators to ensure accuracy in these heraldic programs, as mistakes could carry serious political consequences. The wrong tincture in a coat of arms might suggest insult to a powerful family, while incorrect positioning could imply claims to authority that the patron did not possess. These collaborations between heralds and artists created some of medieval manuscript illumination's most sophisticated symbolic programs. Religious manuscripts contain layers of typological meaning that connect Old Testament events with New Testament fulfillment in visual programs of extraordinary complexity. A single page might show David's victory over Goliath in the main miniature, while border decorations depict Christ's triumph over Satan, creating theological arguments about salvation history through carefully orchestrated visual parallels. Medieval audiences trained in biblical interpretation could read these typological connections as sophisticated theological treatises presented through images rather than words. The development of allegorical imagery reaches particular sophistication in manuscripts dealing with abstract concepts like virtues, vices, philosophy, and natural science. Illuminators created visual personifications for ideas that had no physical form, developing iconographic traditions that remained consistent across centuries and geographical boundaries. Justice appears as a crowned female figure holding scales and a sword, while temperance pours water into wine to demonstrate moderation. These personifications allowed medieval artists to make abstract concepts tangible and memorable. Seasonal cycles embedded within manuscript decorations reflect both agricultural realities and spiritual metaphors in programs that speak to multiple levels of meaning simultaneously. The labours of the months, popular in calendars and books of hours, show peasants performing seasonal tasks while simultaneously representing the soul's spiritual journey through earthly life toward heavenly reward. Ploughing fields becomes preparation for spiritual growth, while harvest imagery suggests divine judgment and the gathering of faithful souls. Astrological symbolism permeates medieval manuscripts in ways that modern audiences often misunderstand as mere superstition, but actually reflected sophisticated intellectual traditions that connected human fate with cosmic order. Zodiacal imagery in calendars and medical texts presented complex theories about planetary influences on human health, personality, and destiny. These visual programs required deep learning in astronomical theory and medical knowledge, representing some of medieval culture's most advanced scientific thinking. The representation of exotic animals in manuscript marginalia often carries symbolic meanings derived from medieval bestiaries, encyclopedic works that described both real and imaginary creatures while explaining their moral significance. Lions represent Christ's resurrection because medieval naturalists believed lionesses gave birth to dead cubs that came to life after 3 days. Pelicans symbolize Christ's sacrifice because they were thought to pierce their own breasts to feed their young with their blood. These animal symbols created rich vocabularies of spiritual meaning, accessible to educated audiences. Gender symbolism within manuscript illumination reflects complex medieval attitudes toward masculine and feminine principles that often contradict modern assumptions about medieval misogyny. Female personifications of abstract virtues like wisdom, justice, and the church itself suggest positive valuations of feminine qualities, while male figures often represent negative concepts like violence, pride, and worldly temptation. These symbolic programs present nuanced views of gender that challenge simplistic interpretations of medieval attitudes. The clothing and accessories worn by figures in manuscript illuminations carry social and symbolic meanings as complex as any heraldic program. Fabric patterns, jewelry designs, and costume details identify not only social status, but also moral character, religious devotion, and political allegiance. Illuminators working for sophisticated patrons needed encyclopedic knowledge of contemporary fashion and its symbolic associations to create images that communicated appropriate messages to their intended audiences. Architectural elements within manuscript compositions function as symbolic frameworks that organize spiritual and temporal hierarchies. Gothic cathedral settings suggest divine authority and orthodox belief, while classical ruins imply the fallen state of pagan antiquity. Contemporary architectural styles identify scenes with specific time periods and cultural contexts, allowing illuminators to create complex historical narratives that speak to educated audiences familiar with architectural symbolism. The integration of text and image creates opportunities for visual puns and wordplay that demonstrate medieval illuminators' sophisticated understanding of linguistic and artistic relationships. Initial letters might be formed from objects that relate phonetically to the sounds they represent, while decorative elements can illustrate metaphors embedded within the written text. These visual verbal connections require bilingual or trilingual literacy and represent some of the most intellectually demanding aspects of medieval manuscript culture. Secret societies and religious confraternities sometimes commissioned manuscripts with symbolic programs that identified members while concealing their activities from outsiders. These coded visual languages allowed groups to maintain cohesion and communicate shared values through seemingly conventional religious imagery. Modern scholars continue discovering these hidden layers of meaning within manuscripts that appeared to be straightforward devotional texts. The symbolic language of medieval manuscripts created bridges between literate and illiterate audiences, allowing complex ideas to reach people who could not read text but could interpret visual symbols. This dual communication system made manuscripts powerful tools for education, propaganda, and social control, extending their influence far beyond the educated elites who could afford to own them. The intricate symbolic programs woven through manuscript pages represent the final layer in a creation process that has transformed raw materials from across the medieval world into vessels of meaning that transcend their physical forms. As evening shadows lengthen across Dame Marguerite's workshop, the day's labours draw toward their close, but the manuscripts themselves will continue their journeys through time, carrying forward the accumulated knowledge, artistry and devotion of countless hands. The completed psalter resting on her illumination desk embodies every aspect of the craft we have witnessed unfolding. Parchment that began as living skin now bears letters formed with perfect precision by goose quill pens, wielded with decades of practiced skill. Pigments ground from stones carried along ancient trade routes glow with colours that will outlast the buildings around them. Gold leaf burnish to mirror brightness captures and reflects light in ways that make the very words appear to dance with divine fire. Every element has been transformed through patient craft into something greater than the sum of its parts. The symbolic language embedded within these decorated pages speaks across centuries to anyone willing to learn its vocabulary. Modern viewers who understand that white lilies represent purity and red roses symbolize divine love can begin to read these visual texts as medieval audiences did, discovering layers of meaning that reveal themselves like flowers opening to morning sun. The marginalia that seemed merely decorative reveals itself as sophisticated commentary, while heraldic elements create political statements as complex as any diplomatic treaty. This single manuscript represents the convergence of skills, materials, and traditions that stretched across the medieval world. Afghan lapis lazuli, ground to ultramarine blue in a Parisian workshop. Spanish gold beaten to impossible thinness by specialized craftsmen. Parchment prepared from English calfskin according to techniques refined over generations. Knowledge passed from master to apprentice in unbroken chains that connected contemporary artisans with craftsmen whose names have been forgotten, but whose techniques live on in every brushstroke. The rhythms of creation that governed medieval scriptorians continue to echo through time, reminding us that the most enduring achievements emerge from patience, dedication, and respect for traditional knowledge. The canonical hours that structured monastic life created natural intervals for rest and reflection that prevented the fatigue and haste that destroy precision. Seasonal variations in light and weather taught craftsmen to work with natural cycles rather than against them, producing art that harmonized with the larger patterns that govern all life. The collaborative nature of manuscript production offers lessons that resonate beyond medieval workshops. Master scribes, illuminators, parchment makers, pigment grinders, and countless other specialists contributed their expertise to create objects that no single individual could have produced alone. This interdependence fostered communities of learning where knowledge flowed freely between craftsmen who understood that their individual success depended on the overall health of their shared traditions. The economic networks that supported manuscript creation connected remote monasteries with international trade routes, demonstrating how artistic achievement depends on complex systems of exchange and cooperation. The lapis lazuli that created heavenly blues in English prayer books required peaceful trade relationships stretching from European workshops to Central Asian mines. Political instability anywhere along these routes could disrupt artistic production in distant scriptoriums, making manuscript illumination a truly global enterprise centuries before modern globalization. Women's participation in manuscript production, often overlooked in traditional histories, reveals itself as more extensive and significant than commonly recognized. Dame Marguerite and her female colleagues possessed skills that equaled any male practitioner, while bringing perspectives and sensibilities that enrich the art form in ways that all male workshops could not achieve. Their prayer books and devotional texts speak to specifically feminine spiritual experiences, while maintaining the highest standards of technical excellence. The technological innovations that emerged from medieval scriptoriums laid foundations for developments that would eventually transform human communication. Experiments with paper, improvements in ink formulations, advances in binding techniques, and refinements in pigment preparation all contributed to knowledge bases that would enable the printing revolution and beyond. Medieval manuscript makers were research scientists as well as artists, constantly seeking better materials and methods for their craft. The preservation of classical knowledge through manuscript copying represents one of history's most crucial cultural transmissions. Without the patient labour of medieval scribes, works by Aristotle, Plato, Virgil, and countless other ancient authors would have vanished entirely. These craftsmen served as bridges between the classical world and the Renaissance that would rediscover and celebrate ancient learning. Their copies, made with religious devotion to accuracy, became the sources from which printed editions would eventually make classical knowledge widely available. The spiritual dimension of manuscript creation invested every aspect of the process with sacred significance that elevated craft to the level of worship. Monks who spent their lives copying biblical texts understood their work as a form of prayer, while secular illuminators often approached their tasks with similar reverence for the knowledge they were helping to preserve and transmit. This spiritual motivation sustained craftsmen through years of meticulous labour that might otherwise have seemed tedious. The aesthetic achievements of medieval manuscript illumination continue to inspire artists and designers working in contemporary media. The principles of colour harmony, compositional balance, and symbolic meaning that governed medieval workshops remain relevant to anyone seeking to create images that communicate effectively. Modern graphic designers study medieval manuscripts to understand how text and image can work together to create unified visual experiences that serve both functional and aesthetic purposes. The patience that characterized medieval manuscript production offers profound lessons for our accelerated age. In cultures obsessed with speed and efficiency, the deliberate pace of medieval craftsmen reminds us that the most valuable achievements often require time, reflection, and willingness to work within natural limitations. The scribe who spent months copying a single book created something far more durable and meaningful than anything produced by hurried labour. As darkness finally settles over the medieval workshop, the day's labours pause but never truly end. Tomorrow will bring new pages to illuminate, fresh pigments to grind, and additional layers of gold leaf to burnish into brilliance. The cycle continues as it has for centuries, connecting each day's work to an unbroken tradition of craftsmanship that stretches back through generations of dedicated artisans. The manuscripts themselves will outlive their creators by centuries, carrying forward the accumulated skill, knowledge, and devotion invested in every page. Some will find homes in monastery libraries where they will guide prayers and contemplation for generations of monks. Others will serve royal courts as symbols of power and cultural achievement. Still others will travel to distant lands, spreading artistic techniques and symbolic languages across boundaries of culture and faith. The soft scratch of quills against parchment fades to silence as the last illuminator sets down her brush and carefully covers her pigment pots against the night air. Candles are extinguished one by one, leaving the workshop in darkness that will lift again with tomorrow's dawn. But the manuscripts themselves seem to retain a subtle glow, their gold decorations catching and holding the final traces of light like earthly stars that will guide future generations through the darkness toward knowledge, beauty, and understanding. In this quiet moment between day and night, between the completion of one manuscript and the beginning of another, we can feel the profound peace that comes from work done with skill, patience, and reverence. The medieval artisans who created these luminous books understood something we have largely forgotten, that the act of creation, when performed with proper dedication, becomes a form of prayer that connects the maker with sources of meaning that transcend individual ambition. Their legacy lives on in every surviving manuscript, in every museum display case where medieval books continue to astonish viewers with their beauty and complexity. But more importantly, their example persists as a reminder that the most enduring achievements emerge from communities of craftsmen who understand that excellence requires patience, collaboration, and respect for traditions that connect individual effort with accumulated wisdom. The illuminated manuscripts of the medieval world represent humanity at its most creative and most devoted, transforming humble materials through skill and dedication into objects that continue to inspire wonder centuries after their creation. In their pages, we find not just artistic achievement, but evidence of what becomes possible when human hands, guided by knowledge and motivated by reverence, commit themselves to the patient work of creating beauty that will outlast its makers. Thank you for joining us on this gentle journey through the illuminated world of medieval manuscripts. If you enjoyed our exploration and are still awake, we invite you to discover our other historical adventures waiting in the darkness. And if you have drifted into peaceful sleep somewhere along our path through ancient scriptoriums and workshops, rest well and enjoy the campfire.